Hi guys, I'm Sam. I'm from the Unity of Life and welcome back to my channel. So if you've been watching some of my other videos, you'll know that we've been talking a little bit about animals recently. So we're going to do another video on animals, and we're going to be looking at animal communication methods rather than horrific conditions found in some zoos like in the last video. And then from here we'll be moving on to scent communication purely in wolves, and you'd be probably pleased to know that would be like the last video I have on wolves for a little while anyway. So we're going to be looking at, we're just going to get into today's videos, and we're going to be looking at different elements that are involved with animal bonding and imprinting. Don't worry, you don't know what imprinting is because we're going to go over it. So we're going to also have a look at the mechanisms that are involved in both bonding and imprinting. And this is important as the animals, they develop into their adulthood, so they know what they need to do. They know what species they are and how to act like that species, sort of like species specific etiquette, if you will. You know how we have like these society norms of how to be human. Well, it's the same thing for a principle for animals as well. They have these society norms of what exactly it is that makes them. Say whether it's a big cat or a domesticated dog. So and they also learn throughout this development whether or not they're a prey animal or they're a predator, which is obviously very, very important, because you need to know if you're somebody's lunch, and if you are a predator, you need to know what your lunch is and what it looks like, basically. So we're going to compare differences and similarities between bonding and imprinting, and why bonding and imprinting it is important for an animal's survival. So just in case, yes, so we are going to go into what imprinting is and what bonding is. So don't worry, you don't quite know these terms. So let's look at some of the mechanisms that are involved in bonding. So bonding is a biological and emotional and a physiological connection between two animals. So so basically all that means it's there's an emotional connection. So let's put it in concept that we're going to understand. That emotional concept to you could be when you're flooded with dopamine, or or oxytocin, or both, and you get that lovey-dovey feeling that you get when you're in love with somebody. You know, these so-called butterflies in the stomach, and how you feel like you can't breathe without that person there, but you also struggle to breathe when they're there. I thought that making sense because I've never actually been in love, so what do I know? But anyway, and like a physiological sort of connection is a bit harder to. Psychological. It didn't say physiological. That's, I guess it says psychological. That's me being dyslexic and not reading my notes properly. And again, psychological isn't really an emotion, it's something that your brain perceives. So it's like, unfortunately, because we're complicated people, complicated species and stuff, that some people, they have psychological issues, and where somebody, let's put it in simple terms, like somebody smiles at them, or it is nice to them and is kind to them, and they're like that with everybody, but somebody misinterprets that kindness into they have feelings for them and they're in love, so they have this psychological connection to that person that they think is rather emotional, where there's no emotion there whatsoever, because there's no like hormones, like I said, there's no like dopamine or oxytocin a bit like flooding your brains and your system to show that you have that psychological it's just all in your head, basically. That connection is purely just in your mind, it's in nobody else's mind, because emotional connections, obviously, they work both ways, but obviously you can some feelings and some emotions are obviously emotional and they are psychological. But I'll explain. So basically what we're on about is, it's like you've got your parent, offspring, siblings, and courting animals. Because of the emotions that you feel, so being flooded with oxytocin or dopamine, when it comes to courting animals, you have that connection that this is in your head through these emotions, that this is, e.g., this is my mate. If your brain's getting flooded with dopamine, but if your hormone system's being flooded with oxytocin, then you may also have this psychological connection that this is my offspring. I gave birth to you, or I fathered you, or we have the same parents, so you're not an ideal mate or whatever, or you're my caregiver, whatever it is. And this is obviously this is what is it forms a bond. So I've already mentioned oxytocin, and the reason I'm mentioning that is because this bonding sort of behaviour is caused by oxytocin. So you probably heard a lot when a woman gives birth to a child, or some surrogate has had a child for somebody else. What they will do, or they'll recommend, is that you curl your baby onto like bare skin, and that's meant to be, so I don't quite know how it works, but there's some sort of emotional connection there for the baby, and that helps with this oxytocin going through the baby and going through the parent, and obviously that forms this bond, because obviously this bond needs to exist for this child to be able to grow up and survive, basically. And it's the same with animals, because they've obviously got less chances, because they've got more things in the world that are going to kill them potentially before they get to adulthood, and sometimes they need the protection of this parent. So if they don't have that bond with their parent, then there's not going to be any sort of protection there for them. But yeah, so that's why the oxytocin happens, and oxytocin, it is a very important hormone, which you've probably already established from what I've just been talking about, and it obviously, now oxytocin is awful, can be a very awful hormone, especially for the woman, because it's critical for the role of childbirth, right? So it's actually oxytocin that is making your uterus, your womb, contract, and helping to push that baby out of you. So it's oxytocin that's giving you all that pain. Keep that in mind next time you have a child, because as much as it's the love hormone, it obviously it contributes to the pain of childbirth. And it's not just females that have oxytocin, it's also males, and oxytocin helps with the male reproduction as well. Probably a lot of males will be like, oh no, I don't have this lovey-dovey feeling, but it's there. The hormone still plays the role, even if you don't have that emotional love connection with your partner. But there you go. So bonding between a parent and offspring is there. So like I said, so like the parent is going to look after the offspring, right? So they're going to survive, but also not only are they going to like feed them and nourish them into the adults, it's obviously very important for them to learn key skills and in life as well. So the parents need to help them with that as well. So the role is not as simple as he is food, he is water, grow up, go off, reproduce on your own and make me a grandparent. You have to be able to teach them things as well. So like, how do you catch your own food, for example? So they also learn, like I said, these important life skills, like how to find their own food. And there's a period of time for dogs, for example, that allows the puppy to learn about socialising and relationships, and this happens between 3 and 10 weeks old, which is why it is so important that puppies don't leave them until they're about 8 weeks old, sometimes 10, depends on the breed and how comfortable they are. And in that time period, they must socialise with other dogs. It's not necessarily like the parent and the siblings, but obviously because a lot of puppies, they get their second lot of injections when they're 8 weeks old, and that's when you can then start taking them to like puppy classes, and they can socialise with other dogs that are like similar ages to them, or just other dogs in general, and they kind of learn how to be a dog. So bonding can take place when an animal socialises with another of the same or different species. For example, grooming, playing, and eating. So these are all very important aspects. Does anybody who's watching this, if anybody owns a horse, okay, so grooming and feeding this horse is very important for you to be able to form a bond between you and your horse, right? Because obviously you need that bond because you're going to be riding this horse, so there's a lot of trust there between you and this animal, because you are trusting that this animal isn't going to freak out and seriously hurt you. Obviously that does occur and it does happen, but it's like an accidental thing because like the horse has been spooked and it's thrown its rider, but horses will kick you, and that can be obviously quite dangerous, and if there isn't that bond between them, they will just kick you because they don't like you, or if you have that bond, they're less likely to inflict harm and pain on you. And also when you've got a newborn, you've not a newborn, but you've brought home a new puppy for the first time, you want that puppy to be able to bond with you, so it's easier to train, and it's going to be easier to train because you're bonding with it, and you're going to bond through like eating, grooming, and playing. So because you're playing with that puppy, and that puppy's like, "Oh, you're fun, you're cool, I'm going to listen to you," and they'll see you as a parental figure as well, possibly because you're feeding them, and they don't quite know how to feed themselves. Because the difference between a domesticated animal and a wild animal is a wild animal has to go out and actually physically look for its food. With domesticated animals, they generally are given their food by their caregiver, like they did from their parents did when they were very, very young. So these skills of this grooming, this playing, this eating to strengthen this bond is important, so then an animal can go off and it can mate with the opposite sex and produce offspring of its own. Generally, if it's the same species, by the way, sometimes they may learn from their parents how it is to be a parent as well. So generally, you can probably find a lot of, you'll see it in films and stuff, there's a man and there's a woman, or there's two men who are in whatever the scenario is, there's two people, right? And they're going to be parents in one way, shape or another, if it's a natural way or if it's via adoption or surrogacy or IVF and whatever. They're going to be a parent, right? And you'll find that sometimes there's one that is absolutely bricking it because they don't know how to be a parent, because their parents weren't around for them when they were growing up, so they're a bit scared they're going to screw up this child's life because they didn't have a parent, so they don't know what it is to be a mom or to be a dad or to be whatever it is that they want to be this parental figure. They just don't know how to be it because they've never had that parent, but because they've got this bond with their partner, their loved one, they're able to be a successful parent, basically, and their fears go away. So the other technical word that I mentioned was imprinting, so we're going to get into what imprinting is. So I'm not going to even... I think his surname's Lorenz. I'm not sure how to pronounce his first name. Conrad Lorenz? Oh, I don't know. But anyway, this guy... It's not really important what his name is, but this guy basically, he studied animal behaviour using... comparative zoological methods, so it's not very too much about what that is, noting how behavioural patterns may be traced to an evolutionary past. So basically, again, describing learning behaviour in this process is called imprinting. So what he was trying to figure out was how animals have sort of evolved, and could we tell this from present species, because obviously they're going to be different to their ancestral species because they've obviously evolved from them and now it's now a total different species. So what is that particularly like? So imprinting, it is usually caused by a newborn precocial animal. So what's a precocial animal before we moved totally on, in case you aren't aware, because why would you be aware of this? Because it's a technical word and we don't know everything, do we? So a precocial animal is an animal that is born with its eyes open and it can move quite quickly. So these are usually like prey animals, but they are more likely to be birds. So basically a precocial animal can be born and it'll look like, or hatched in the case of birds, and it'll look like a mini adult. Sometimes precocial animals have this parental care, sometimes they don't. It depends totally on the species. Birds generally do have some sort of parental care. Even cuckoo birds, even though they're not raised by the same species as them, they still have parental care. It's a tricky way of adoption. Sneaky. Cuckoo birds are awful. If you want to know more about them, just Google them. Actually, this is not what this video is about. So imprinting is basically these precocial animals, because they're born with their eyes open, they fixate on the first moving object they see. So this is generally usually the mother, but that's not always the case. And the reason is it's really complicated because they just form this bond straight away with something that moves, right? The first thing that they see that moves, and they're like, this must be my parent, this must be what I look like, must be what I need to do. So it's a bit like in Tangled in Disney, where Rapunzel was kidnapped by a woman, has been raised to grow up in this tower. She has no idea what a man looks like, right? Apart from her mother saying they have pointy teeth. And that scares the crap out of her, and then Flynn comes into the tower, she knocks him out, and because it's a Disney film and Disney films are not realistic whatsoever, as soon as she lays eyes on him, she falls in love with the first man that she sees. So if we think about Rapunzel falling in love with the first man she's ever met or never seen in her entire life, it's a kind of the similar thing to a precocial animal. They see the first moving thing and they automatically assume that that is their parent and that is the one that's going to be looking after them, and that is what they're going to ultimately become. And it ain't always the case. So imprinting happens during something that we call a sensitive period, and that is usually the first 24 to 48 hours of that particular animal's life, this precocial animal's life. So this animal that's born with its eyes open. And imprinting is irreversible, right? So as soon as they've imprinted on something, even if that's not the right species for them, that is it. They're going to grow up and think that that's what they are. When an animal is imprinting, they tend to follow and act like the object of their fascination. This is why it's so important that in your hand-rearing a bird, that you, when you're raising it, that you have these sock puppets that look like that particular bird. And you don't talk to them, but maybe play sounds from that bird species. Okay. Because precocial animals, and the reason for this is they're born with this advanced state of development because they need to get away from a predator fast. And if they imprint on the wrong thing, then they may not necessarily know that their predator is their predator and it's going to eat them, right? So imprinting involves sound, sight and smell. Imprinting works best when the animal is under stress, as it will need to learn what to run away from to survive, like we've just said about its predators, and it is believed that there is a type of imprinting that happens before birth, and this is where the fetus hears the parents' vocalizations and learn who its parents are, but this is a different type of imprinting altogether. You've probably seen like herds of geese or something following people. They've imprinted on the person's boots, so they're like walking around thinking that those boots are their parents and that they're a pair of boots, and they're gonna walk like those boots are because they don't realise that there's something else attached to those boots that are making those boots move, and that the boots are not alive and aren't actually a real thing, but because that's all they can see. They can't really see any further up because they're so small. So what are the similarities between this imprinting and this bonding? Well, so imprinting and bonding are the both needed to survive. Imprinting can teach the qualities which a potential good mate should have. So bonding can also help with potential suitors before mating takes place, and siblings can imprint on each other, and they can also bond, and this helps to prevent interbreeding, and the parents, obviously, they imprint, and that means that they bond with their offspring to make them grow up. So when we say that, it means that they know what their mates are. They will see an animal that generally will look a little different to them. They're going to look similar, but there might be some differences, the sexual differences. So, for example, with peacocks, a sexual difference with them is that the males are obviously these got bright blue plumage and these massive tail feathers that look like eyes. So they're going to imprint on their parents and maybe say that's what their dad looks like, and they're going to imprint on their siblings, so they kind of know what the opposite sex and others of the same species look like. And the reason I say this is because we are aware that in nature hybrids do exist. So like mules, for example, generally though, those hybrids, so a hybrid is a animal, because it's not classed as a species of its own, is an animal that's born from two different species. So a mule, for example, is born from a horse and a donkey, but the mule is sterile. They can't go off and breed, right? And that's why a mule is not a species of its own, because its genetic line ends with them. They're not fertile. And the reason for this is because a donkey and a horse, even though they're quite similar in species and possibly have evolved from the same sort of ancestor a long time ago, I'm not quite sure with that, they have their different amount of chromosomes. So I think a donkey has less chromosomes than what a horse does. So the horse, I can't remember how many chromosomes they each have, but the mule has basically one more chromosome than its donkey parent, but one less chromosome less than its horse parent. They do believe, however, that ligers, for example, which is a cross between a tiger and a lion, which only tends to happen in zoos because tigers and lions don't live anywhere near each other, it's believed that they have the same amount of chromosomes, because remember, you get 50% of your DNA from your mum, you get 50% of your DNA from your dad, and they think that if two species do have the same number of chromosomes as one another, and they do manage to breed because they're quite similar in the species and produce this hybrid offspring, and this hybrid offspring could potentially go on and have children and actually be fertile because it has this same amount of chromosomes. However, there is not enough evidence to back this up, because most hybrids that are born generally are sterile. They're just infertile, and they're just not a species that they're grown. It was just that I was reading something the other day about a hybrid human, which was to do with two different species of what are humans during the evolutionary process. Whether or not she was fertile, we'll never know, because she died when she was so young. But anyway, so what are the differences between this imprinting and the bonding? Well, bonding is hormonal, and most animals bond, but there's the exception that prey animals, they imprint, and the animals that generally imprint are birds. That's not to say other animals don't imprint, but it is mostly birds. We're just going to stick with birds to make it easier for you to understand. And imprinting, that doesn't involve any hormones, that involves the nervous system, mainly to do with your eyes. And most birds, they imprint, and predators, they bond, right? So how they aid survival. So sexual imprinting is important for survival because the imprinting is done correctly. Then a newborn precocial animal can learn from its parents, its siblings, its neighbours what the opposite sex looks like, and also acts like it. That's also very important. We've already sort of mentioned this just before we talked about hybrids. This means that when the offspring reaches sexual maturity, they know what to look for in a mate. However, if the animal is raised by the same gender or a different species, they do not know what a potential mate looks like. They will try and mate with the same gender or a different species, and this stops them from producing offspring. And before we get on to, in case we get comments and people are like, this is exactly what we shouldn't have gay couples, blah, 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 blah. This is generally animals that imprint. Humans do not imprint, okay? So you cannot use that as an argument for your atrocious, horrible, homophobic views and behaviour, okay? Because we don't imprint, we generally bond. That's to do with hormones. And because we're quite social animals, you're not just going to be seeing your parents, regardless if you have same-sex parents or not. You're still going to go to school and you're still going to see people who obviously are of a different gender to what you are. So just for that to be noted, that is generally speaking about animals that do imprint, which is to do with the nervous system. It is not to do with hormones, and it is not an argument that you can use just because you're homophobic, okay? If you are a homophobic person and you are watching this, I suggest that you don't continue watching any videos on this channel, because this channel is not for you, and because we're here to promote equality amongst people and with animals, and I really couldn't care less if somebody is gay or not. As long as they're a kind person and that they are happy, then that is all that's important, and that's all that matters to me, and that's all I cared about, is if people are happy and they're generally nice. Anything else is, it's what it is. It just makes that person who they are. Let's continue. So young animals, they imprint on their parents to learn things. For example, they will learn all the skills they need to survive and pass on their genes. They will learn what wants to eat them, and more importantly, what is bad for them to eat and what is good for them to eat, because the last thing you want to do is A, get eaten, or B, you pick up a poison berry and die. They will learn how to find their food, because obviously if you can't find your food, you're dead, because you can't eat. And some will need to learn how to fly, e.g. again, birds. Imprinting on the right species is important. It would be very hard for an animal to survive if they didn't know what their species was. Although there have been cases, like recently there was a lioness that she tried to raise a leopard cub that had been, I don't know if he'd been orphaned or he had been abandoned. Unfortunately, he didn't survive very long because he had some issues. It was nothing to do with the fact that he was being raised by lions and he was a leopard. He was born, I think, with some illness or something that was going to shorten his lifespan. So animals that imprint on their parents also do this for protection. Imprinting alone is no good for protection without bonding. Excuse me. Animals that bond, us humans included, are born totally dependent on their parents. They need their parents to feed them, protect them from harm, and show them the life skills they will need in the future. Because if anybody's seen a baby, you know that they can't survive on their own, because they can't feed themselves. They don't know what their food is. They cry, and that they can't really communicate in any other way. And so, they're really dependent on their parents, because the parents is the one that cleans them, keeps good hygiene, makes sure that they're healthy, makes sure they're getting all the food and nutrition that they need, because they can't do that themselves. So bonding with siblings is good for predators as they play together. So like in wolf packs, for example, if they bond with their siblings and they have this bond, then they're going to have a really united and really strong pack and be able to take down bigger prey animals. and what they would be able to do on their own. So this is a good way to learn how to hunt when they're play fighting. And the bond between the parents and the siblings also stops inbreeding, because you associate the fact that is your sibling and your parent. You share this genetic material with them, so they're not good mates because you need genetic diversity. Obviously, this is not the thought process of an animal, but it is the same way of how it works, even though it's a subconscious thing for them. Even though the offspring may be totally dependent on the parent, it's not totally clueless. There are some things that just can't be taught, e.g. going to the toilet, eating and drinking. These are all natural instincts. Like, nobody teaches you how to drink, nobody teaches you how to eat, and nobody tells you how to go to the bathroom. Like, we get, like, for humans example, you get potty trained, e.g. you don't wet yourself, basically. You go to the loo, and that's where you do your business. But nobody tells you how to actually teach you how to do your business in the first place. Just where it's appropriate to do it. However, just like imprinting on the wrong species, animals can bond with a different species, and this is called interspecies bonding. And for example, cats and dogs can bond with each other and form cute little friendships. And obviously, cats and dogs and both domesticated animals, they tend to bond with us humans as well. And sometimes the animal doesn't need us to survive, but we need them to survive. For example, we train dogs to help us with tasks. We can no longer do for ourselves because of a disability. So the dog would be fine living, because it would revert back to living in a pack, right? And it'd be able to hunt and look after its own food. You see this in feral dogs, so they don't really need us to survive, but sometimes we need them to survive because of generally because of the way that we are born, because something in our development when we were in the womb maybe didn't go right, or we grew up and we were fine, but we had got into an accident and something was taken away from us. We can no longer do something, or maybe we can't do something like everybody else can do something, so we need that little bit of help from a dog. So to conclude, communications, bonding and imprinting are essential for the survival and the evolution of the species. It also enables the close relationship and the cohesiveness with some species more than others. So these phenomena are not fully understood, and obviously research is continuing. So like I said, when I talked about hybrids, there's not enough information there to say whether or not two species that have similar amount of chromosomes would be able to produce a fertile offspring as such. There's only like a few cases in which that may or may not happen. There's still not an awful lot known about it. And there's obviously still a lot we don't quite understand. The way that animals imprint, why they imprint on something that is the first moving thing and isn't generally their parent, because that doesn't make sense in an evolutionary way. You would think that evolution would come up with a way that when these imprinting animals would imprint immediately and only on their parent figure, or their parent that is obviously of the same species, and they wouldn't imprint on any other species, like it would be impossible or something. But that's not the case, and we don't know why that's not the case. So we still need to do research to find out all these things, and it's why science is so rather important. So if you think like you have learned something from this video, or you've got any questions, put your questions down in the comments and I will try to get back to you as soon as I possibly can. If you've learned something and you feel like somebody else can learn from this video, then share this with all your friends and all your family if you feel like they could learn from some of the content in which I've covered today. If you're watching this and you have not already done so, you can click on my face down here and you can subscribe. And if you want to see any of the other animal content videos I have been doing, then click on the playlist here and you can watch all my previous videos on animals. I will see you in the next video. Bye.